Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest edition of the Sherlockian interview. This afternoon, we're going to be interviewing Orlando Pearson. Hi, Orlando.
Hi, Steve.
And where are you dialing in from?
I'm dialing in from very cold London. There's a force 9 gale blowing outside as far as I can tell, and everything's banned. You're not allowed to go out, you're not allowed to do very much, but they can't stop you wearing a Sherlock Holmes outfit at home, and that's what I've decided to do to mark this occasion.
Fantastic. Well, we've got the same gale. We're in North London up here, and it's just as cold. Let's dive straight into the new book, the Redacted Sherlock Holmes Volume 6. It's another really colourful cover. I really love the use of the pink on this one. Who have you got there? I can see there's Mycroft bottom left. Is that Kaiser Bill in the middle?
It is, yeah. In Volume 5, I had Mycroft and Kaiser Wilhelm in the same story. And Mycroft, who is the British government, demonstrates that being the British government often leads to uncomfortable choices. And in Volume 6, each has their own story. And Mycroft again takes what I can only say are Machiavellian decisions, which relate to a recent British scandal in a story called A Perilous Engagement. And on the Kindle cover, so the cover of the individual story, A Perilous Engagement, you get a picture of Dr. Watson's second wife. She's mentioned a couple of times in the canon, but no other researcher of Holmes and Watson's biographies have ever identified who she was. But any person who knows anything about the Sherlock Holmes stories and reads mine will discover just how appropriate and obvious it in fact is what Dr. Watson's second wife was. And in this story, Sherlock Holmes actually brokers the marriage between Dr. Watson and Dr. Watson's second wife. So it seems quite appropriate. And that's the first story in the set. And in the third story, which is called An Encirclement Thwarted, we learn about the events around the last bow. We've learned that the last bow was far from being the only espionage activity that Sherlock Holmes was taking part in the run-up to the Great War. Lots of pastiche writers describe their works as being sequels. I've myself done sequels of the Bruce Partington Plans, The Three Students, The Hound of the Baskervilles, and A Case of Identity. This one is slightly different. It's not a sequel. This story runs in parallel to his last bow. And it doesn't require anyone to know the last bow, though there are lots of references to it. It also draws on Holmes's monograph on ciphers, which he refers to in the Dancing Men. You may recall that he mentions he's done a monograph on ciphers, deciphering 160 different ciphers. And in this story, in Encirclement Thwarted, he deciphers another cipher used by the Germans in the run-up to the First World War. And it has a crucial role in preventing the Western Allies being routed in August 1914.
And when we look at the top left-hand corner of the book cover, who's that?
Well, Steve, it's one of my ambitions to be MX Publishing's first Nobel Prize winner for literature. And I'm sure I'll be the first of many, but it's my ambition to be the first. And this book is my attempt to get that Nobel Prize. I think $700,000 is the prize for Nobel literature, for the Nobel Prize for Literature. It's a prize well worth going after. But obviously it's a bit hard flying to Stockholm at the moment with the COVID-19 virus. I thought the next best thing I could do was to base a story around the story of another Nobel Prize winner. So the rather fierce-looking cigar-smoking man in the top left-hand corner is Thomas Mann, who is a German writer who won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1929. And one of his books is called Death in Venice, which was turned into a film by Lucio Visconti and into an opera by Benjamin Britten. And my own version of the work is called Death at Tennis, and it mixes Thomas Mann with Cinderella and an anomaly about the names of London's thoroughfares, which I'm sure all fans of fiction, of crime fiction, will enjoy.
Fantastic. And the one of the stories is called The Sorceress and the Sea Lord. And I'm not being funny, but a sorceress sounds quite un-Holmesian.
Well, I beg to differ on that. This story is, I call this story Holmestory. It's not history, it's Holmestory. It's very biographical about Sherlock Holmes. Volume 4 of the redacted Sherlock Holmes had a story called The Baron of Wimbledon, and there I identified the real-life daughter and grandson of the great Sherlock Holmes. And volume 6, I revealed the identity of his real-life sister, who was as unique in her own field as was the world's only consulting detective in his. She's the figure on the left side, on the far left of the Kindle cover, and the figure in the top left-hand corner is Camille Saint-Saëns, who was a French composer who lived from about 1840 to about 1920. He's probably best known today for his work, The Carnival of the Animals. And among other things, this sister of Sherlock Holmes was amused at Camille Saint-Saëns, and he described her as a sorceress, and that's where I got the name, where I got that part of the title from. He called her a pythonesse, which is the French for a sorceress. When I first came across the term, I thought it meant a female python, which didn't sound a very appropriate thing to call the sister of Sherlock Holmes. It in fact means a sorceress. And just for good measure in the story, I reveal the French derivation of Sherlock Holmes's first name. The origin of the word Sherlock is in fact a French one, and there's a French variant of his surname as well. So there's quite a lot in the story. And the text even has this charming picture of the great French painter Auguste Renoir of the 3 daughters of Sherlock Holmes' sister. Of course, they are, in fact, the 3 nieces of Sherlock Holmes. So I keep on looking for relatives of Sherlock Holmes. It may be that I'll find more of them. And you can see they're playing musical instruments. Music plays a very important role in this story.
So if Sherlock Holmes' sister is the sorceress, who's the Sea Lord in the story?
Well, 2 of Sherlock Holmes' most famous contemporaries were the operatic collaborators Gilbert and Sullivan. And they're the mustachioed figures at the centre of both the book cover and the Kindle cover. And Gilbert and Sullivan satirised their contemporaries in their works. One of the people they satirised was the first Lord of the Admiralty. He was a man called W.H. Smith, and W.H. Smith's family founded the stationery chain that bears his name. And this story looks at Smith's career after his time as first Sea Lord. So after he became first Sea Lord in 1887, he became first Lord of the Treasury. And like Gilbert and Sullivan's light operas, The Sorceress and the Sea Lord is a very light-hearted work, but macroeconomic theory is at the heart of it. And I think my story suggests that macroeconomic theory needn't be quite as serious as it sounds. And the Gilbert and Sullivan Society has been very interested in this story, and they're running an article about it, which I'll put on my Orlando Pearson LinkedIn website. They'll be running an article in their magazine that comes out at the end of April.
That sounds like a really full story. So is that the entire, everything you've got to say about it, or is there anything else?
Well, there's more to it because the story is written at the same time as the Reigate Squires. So the Reigate Squires was 1887, so fitting in exactly with the time that W.H. Smith was First Lord of the Treasury. And in the Reigate Squires, Dr. Watson comments that there's no point talking about the Netherlands Sumatra company because the story is too well known already. But it's now 126 years since 1894 when that story was published. So I think probably some followers of Sherlock Holmes will need reminding about the scandal of the Netherlands Sumatra company, and The Sorceress and the Sea Lord does that. And
there's one more figure on the cover that we haven't talked about yet. He's a rather sinister looking man with a swastika on the left-hand side. Who's that?
Yeah, Holmes was a key part of British intelligence in the 1930s and 40s. He ended up in early 1940 going to Bletchley Park as a code breaker. So code breaking is a theme that runs throughout his life. And in previous volumes, I've done stories about Hitler's deputy, who was called Rudolf Hess, the propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels, the Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, and the German ambassador to Britain, Joachim von Ribbentrop. In volume 6, Holmes has an encounter with Heinrich Himmler in a story called De Profundis. De Profundis is a quote from the Bible, meaning from the depths, and it places Holmes and Watson at the darkest place on earth in April 1945. And I'm sure some people won't be comfortable with feel-good heroes like Holmes and Watson in a context like that. But my story, which is, it's 99% true, I can hardly be retold more often. And people who've read the story said they find it quite hard work, but actually it's not meant to be an easy read in any sense of the word. And as I say, I don't think you can do the story that's told in De Profundis more too often. It's a story for the time and for all times.
So overall in the collection, how much is fact and how much is fiction, Orlando?
Well, all the stories have their basis in historical events. When people talk to me about my stories, I always say they are as unoriginal as possible, because all I do is look at Holmes's lifetime, note events where he must have been present, but historians have chosen to redact that presence, and then retell the events including Holmes and Watson. That's why the stories are called the Redacted Sherlock Holmes. And I've been very careful not to change any of the historical events, because that might cause people to question the historical accuracy of the original Conan Doyle stories. So all those people on the cover are real life people, and no one will doubt the historical accuracy of the Conan Doyle stories after reading their links with events whose authenticity no one will dream of questioning.
Where do you get your ideas from? There's a huge variety across the 6 volumes of the stories. How do they jump into your head?
Well, I've always been a wide reader. I particularly like reading history books, and getting Holmes to investigate historic figures, well-known and less well-known, is a natural step from that. I use other themes as well. There's a lot of music in my stories. There's current affairs. So I've done Brexit, and I've done tax evasion. I've done various industries I worked in. There's sport. There is business. And I do find that Holmes works in a variety of settings, which perhaps beyond the traditional criminal setting. And my degree was in literature, so there are lots of literary references in my stories. Thomas Mann in Cinderella in this one. And in previous volumes, I've done Shakespeare, the Bible, and Franz Kafka. But some people who are watching this interview will remember my version of Shakespeare's Macbeth, which we ran at Undershaw in October, called A Scandal in Nova Alba, and actually mixing Shakespeare with Sherlock Holmes works remarkably well. I don't imagine it'll be the last time I mix up other literary works or other events in history and Sherlock Holmes.
You've mentioned the print and the Kindle. Are there any other formats that these stories are available in?
They're coming out individually and as an ebook in the series, of which you can see the cover. And they'll also be coming out as audiobooks. The brilliant Steve White has already done 26 of my stories and 2 of my plays. He's keen to do volume 6 of the Redacted Sherlock Holmes. It's very flattering. And volume 6 takes Holmes to Bulgaria, to Stockholm, to Venice, to Paris, to Lyon, and to 1945 Germany. And they sort of really lend themselves to Steve's amazing facility with voices and with accents. So I think that he'll have a great deal of fun doing these, and I hope that people who buy these books will get as much fun either in the ebook form or in the print form or in the audiobook form as I've had writing them and Steve has had reading them.
Fantastic. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and I look forward to volume 7 soon in the future.
That's great. I look forward to it too. Thanks very much, Steve.